hunt? And do the Lions have an SOL plan to search for their new GM and coach? Join the conversation by commenting live on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch. This is the Fifth Chapter with Dennis Fithian and Brian Chapman. He represents the mitten by way of Penn State. When Chapman gets to talking sports, the people can't wait. He represents the mitten. Be a true EMU, but cut Dennis in the fall and his veins bleeding blue. They got respect around the state when that light turns red. So don't sleep on these dudes. Just invite your friends to cut your nap short and tip your cap for and sit back for the Fifth Chapter. Brian Chapman. Dennis Fithian. When they open their mouths, they spit in the facts, bro. This ain't even optional, man. You just have to tune into YouTube to watch the broadcast or download it to your phone to peep the podcast. They mix laughter, they get after. It's all captured in the Fifth Chapter. That's right. Welcome to the Fifth Chapter. I am Brian Chapman. He is Dennis Fithian. It is time for episode number 60, and we could be just 11 days away from Penn State returning to the Big Ten championship game if a few things go their way, Dennis.
Yeah, you're the only one that I see that is following that narrative that I know, but you're definitely on top of it.
Yeah, well, now that Michigan has waved the white flag on the game against the Deep South Buckeyes, they have 3 more steps to get there. One of them should happen, and that's a victory this Saturday against Michigan State. Then, because Ohio State doesn't have enough games played and Maryland doesn't have enough games played, they would need Indiana to have a coronavirus outbreak, which, as bad as the numbers are getting, and considering the other school from the state of Indiana, Purdue, has an outbreak right now and had to pause their activities, who knows? And if they have an outbreak that forces them to miss the Big Ten championship game next week, the third and final step would be to convince the Big Ten athletic directors to not renege, to not go back on their mandate of having 6 games played, because if that's the case, then the winner of the Penn State-Michigan game or Michigan State game this weekend will face Northwestern for the Big Ten championship. Huge game in State College, potentially this Saturday.
Sorry to burst your bubble, but we'll get to that in Chapter 2. There's going to be some bubble bursting for you.
Oh, no. Of course, it's not like I'm expecting Penn State to go from 0-5 to a Big Ten championship, but it certainly would be nice. It's also obviously nice to have you guys along with us for episode number 60. Want to thank you guys who are tuning in via Facebook Live, via Twitch, and via YouTube. Also, thanks to those who are listening to the podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify. Of course, you can catch the podcast at around 10:30 on the day of each show. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and participate in each show by sending in your feedback via YouTube and Facebook. Dennis will be reading your comments throughout the course of the show. Let's take a look at today's book, and it is loaded. It is loaded. In the second chapter, should Ohio State have to play Michigan or Northwestern on December 19th? If they play Northwestern, it'll be for the conference title. If they play Michigan, obviously it'll be against their biggest rival for more bragging rights. And are they a CFP team? In the third chapter, the Lions are on another 1-game winning streak. And some slappies, you have to assume, are really excited about that because they're only 1 game out of that last playoff spot. Plus, is Rod Wood the right pick or the SOL pick to lead the Lions coach and GM search? In the fourth chapter, some basketball news because Coach Dwayne Casey says Killian Hayes is the starter at point guard right now. LiAngelo Ball is, quote, an excellent player. And Kyrie Irving is at it again. And then in the fifth chapter, it is the major wager. But Dennis, let's start off with the first chapter, and that takes us to the big news of the day. And it's news that was great for a portion of the Michigan fan base because, as you know, all year long, there were a lot of Michigan fans who were saying, hey, you know what, with this coronavirus pandemic and all that's going on right now, it certainly would be kind of nice if they just cancel the game because there's a Rona outbreak. Otherwise, we're going to lose by 80. And today, the wishes of those Michigan fans were granted because Michigan did cancel the game. They did wave that white flag that Kirk Herbstreit was talking about. They had a press conference today in Ann Arbor, and they didn't really provide a whole lot of clarification. They said that the numbers continued to rise throughout the weekend and into early this week, which suggests that they had a positive case, at least one, either yesterday or today. But they didn't give out any specific numbers. Was it 5? Was it 40? Who knows? Also, according to Larry Lage of the Associated Press, and I'll put this up so everybody can see it, we've got, at least some rumors to look at. And he said that Michigan's football program has 16 COVID-19 cases, according to a person familiar with the situation. But does that mean 16 players? Does that mean 4 players and 12 staff members? Nobody knows. Additionally, there was a tweet from Bruce Feldman of The Athletic who said, source, Michigan was going to be without around 45 players this weekend versus Ohio State due to positive COVID-19 cases, contact tracing, and injured players. So a combination of factors would lead to 45 players being out. That's obviously a ton. That's almost double the 23 that were missing for Ohio State when they played Michigan State over the weekend. And then there was the possibility of whether or not they could play this weekend. Could Michigan, I'm sorry, not this weekend, next weekend, could they play Ohio State during Big Ten Championship week and have the Buckeyes not play for the Big Ten Championship, but for bragging rights and their arch rival? And you got this tweet from Isaiah Hull, who was listening to the Ward Manual and Jim Harbaugh press conference earlier today, and said, we will make any adjustments from my standpoint we need to make. If we play Ohio State the 19th, from our perspective, that would be great. So the University of Michigan, or at least their athletic director, is open to the possibility of playing Ohio State, just not this weekend. So, and then, of course, there were also questions asked about Jim Harbaugh and a contract extension that we'll get to in a few minutes. But, Dennis, what do you make of the game being canceled, the coronavirus caseload that's unknown, although there are lots of rumors swirling, and the potential of rescheduling the game on the 19th?
Well, I think when you get into sports, that you're always going to have a lot of people that are going to be looking for, something to kind of, stick a needle in there, get some controversy going. And when it comes down to COVID and health issues, when you have a lack of transparency, and then you have somebody who plants a seed the week before, talking about, they're coaches I've talked with, Dabo Sweeney, have indicated that, teams are using this to beg out of games. Well, then, this is where you're at. You're going to have people like, I look at it like, I know people like to have fun, but it's kind of like if you're watching a game and somebody gets hurt and you're like rooting for it. I mean, even if you're around your friends, and even if it's the other, your bitter rival. I mean, you're really hoping and glad that somebody's hurt. It's bad form, and in this situation here, like, thinking that Michigan is, fudging their numbers to beg out of a game because, they're scared to play Ohio State. Anybody that's doing that, it's kind of the same thing, man. You guys are, you or anybody else that's doing it, that's not part of the fun of the game. You're talking about the pandemic here, and it's just bad form. It was bad form. That's why Herb Street caught so much flack for doing it. Now, if you're a fan and you're saying, well, so what? He was telling the truth. Well, you don't know if he's telling the truth. We don't know. And like I said, because of the numbers that are there and there's no transparency, you can say whatever you want on the other side. I think the bottom line here, I don't know, like, does it work out for Michigan? Does it work out for Harbaugh that they don't have to play Ohio State? Yeah, but you know what? I also look at it like this. Wisconsin at the beginning of the season, Barry Alvarez said that they could have played, the game after the Illinois, and they didn't play 2 games there. Why didn't they? They said that they were trying to nip it in the bud, but really what they were trying to do is they were serving Wisconsin's best interest. Ohio State, 2 weeks ago against Illinois. Why did they not play Illinois? Well, were they trying to keep their season alive? If they really needed to play that game to win a championship, do I think they would have? I do. Gene Smith said, their athletic director, that they could have played that game, but they didn't. So I don't like it. It was in Michigan's best interest here. But do I think they're fudging the numbers? I don't know that. I'm not going to stand up here. How dare anybody say that? But you know what? I think it's just one of these things. Like, you don't know, you don't really know. So when you don't really know, you can just go and say whatever you want. But with Kirk Herbstreit insinuating that the teams would do this, but he's got one of the most popular coaches in all of college football, saying that this very year in the pandemic that Florida State did it, to duck Clemson. So, you know what? Let's just take it all off, make fun of anybody. Guys get injured, using health scares, do whatever you want. Like, it's all fair game.
Well, when you're not transparent, obviously Michigan can use that to their advantage, because when they're not transparent and nobody knows what the numbers except for them, then somebody can come out there like you and say, hey, I mean, what are you going to do? Just accuse them of lying? I mean, they probably got nothing to hide, but we don't know if they have nothing to hide. It would sure help if they were being transparent. Another thing you brought up was Wisconsin. When they canceled their couple of games, what were they doing on their Twitter feed and via press releases on a daily basis? They were releasing their raw numbers. Hey, today is September, or I guess they started in October 15th or whatever, and today we've got a total of 8 cases in the Wisconsin Badger program. The next day we got 12 cases. So everybody knew. It wasn't hey, trust us, we've got an outbreak here, and our doctors are telling us not to do it.
They slid the numbers to the AP. AP reported 12, and then they reported more today. So I mean, that wasn't completely transparent, but there are your numbers.
Well, and even then, it was vague, because when you look at Wisconsin, they said we've got X number of players who have tested positive, whereas you look at what we were talking about earlier. You had the AP, you had Larry Lage saying Michigan football's program has 16 COVID-19 cases. And obviously that could mean 16 players and 0 staffers, or it could mean 5 players and 11 staffers. We don't know. We have to speculate. We have to wonder. And then you look at what happened with Bruce Feldman of The Athletic. He said they were going to be without 45 players due to positive tests, contact tracing, and injured players. If you're injured, I mean, that has nothing to do with coronavirus, and no team has ever canceled a game due to injured players. When it comes to contact tracing, I mean, those players are not subject to sitting out for 21 days, only those that have tested positive due to coronavirus. So is it 7 players that are injured and 7 players that have tested positive for coronavirus and 31 that are out due to contact tracing? We don't know, because they're not giving us those numbers.
Michigan just didn't do a good job, so in revealing their numbers. So
well, they didn't reveal numbers at all. So it's not a good or bad job. They are choosing not to give any numbers so that there will be all sorts of controversy and wonder, and so that people like you and I can say, are they waving the white flag? Are they not? And a lot of fans out there don't care what their reasoning is. A lot of them are pleased that they're not playing the game because they don't want to get blown out by the Deep South Buckeyes again.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, like, it's all over for me. Like, they're not playing. You see all the different numbers there. May have they decided to look out there? Did they possibly look at their roster and think, hey, we're down to our 3rd-string quarterback. We don't have one offensive lineman, so let's just get out of here and not play the game? I think there's a possibility for that. But I'm also not saying for sure that they did that and, they're a bunch of bastards and, oh, man, you know what? Michigan has always, when it comes down to, secrecy, when it comes to the media, and no surprise. I wouldn't be surprised if there were other schools that acted in the same way that they did, have this, secrecy over their numbers and everything. But when you do that, you're an open target. For people.
And they could easily release the numbers, and if the numbers are truly high,
well, I don't know. Not every school has the same policy. You know what? Not everybody's out there and wants, and is protecting. They look at it like they're protecting, their athletes.
Well, they don't have to release the names, because Wisconsin didn't release the names. We found out Graham Mertz tested positive. They didn't say it. There was a report that Graham Mertz tested positive, and then the day after that, the outbreak came out.
If I was advising them, you know what, Chap, if I was advising them, I would advise them to do exactly what you're saying there. But you know what, Michigan is –
because they get sympathy. If the numbers are truly high, they would get sympathy. So release it. Everyone would say, hey, the numbers are sky high. They got, who knows, 20, 25 players that tested positive. There's no way they could play this game. End of story. That's all they have to do.
But you thought because they released them to the AP and didn't distinguish whether or not, or clarify whether it was the staff, and so
we have no idea.
Up for criticism.
If they lose 2 position coaches and 11 water boys and trainers, and then they've got 3 players that tested positive, that's a lot different than just flat out 16 players testing positive. There's a huge difference. So they were if they released that stat to the AP, 16 individuals in the program, that's intentionally vague. And if they release 45 players that wouldn't be able to suit up due to 3 different factors, either testing positive, contact tracing, or injuries, when everybody really wants to know the specific number of players who tested positive, that's intentionally vague.
Yeah, I think they do that. Like, they've had a long-standing, I don't say it was a policy, but that's what they've done over the years. I think they like to spoon feed, like they come out with the vague numbers, and I think they like to spoon feed insiders, I don't know, like that work well with them over the years, to then give them information that they can give out to either paid subscribers or, I think that's what they've got going on.
Isn't that just brilliant?
What's that?
Isn't that just brilliant? I mean, everybody just loves.
I think the point is they ask for some of that. If they're not going to be as forthcoming and as transparent as other schools, and I'll take your word for that. I don't break down all the COVID numbers with everybody else. I know that this has got everybody, in hysteria that Michigan is, purposely doing this because they're scared. Maybe they are. I don't know, but I haven't compared like Wisconsin's protocols and policy with how Ohio State did it and how Michigan's doing it. I saw plenty of insiders talking about 20 to 25 starters or important players that are in the mix that were going to miss the game. You already talked about 45 with Feldman. Those numbers to me, those seem to be pretty alarming. That seemed to be enough.
Yes, that is alarming. And if you're missing 45 players, that's a reason to not show up, because, I mean, I know there's a minimum number of scholarship players that you have to have in order to field the team to play. And if you're going to be without 45 players, what's wrong with Ward Manuel coming out and saying, look, we got injured players, we got contact tracing that our doctors say is very important, and we got players that have tested positive. It's totaled 45 players, therefore we can't play. If he just says we got 45 players that have a 0% chance of playing this weekend, I mean, who's going to rip Michigan for waving the white flag? It'd be very simple.
Everybody, that doesn't like Michigan, which is a lot of people. I mean, but you know what? They asked for it. You know what? If part of those numbers included, their 2 starting quarterbacks, and they only had a red shirt, a true freshman, Dan Villari, and then a bunch of walk-ons behind him, that to me that would have been all right for the safety.
But do what the Broncos did.
Of the program to move on. What's that?
Do what the Broncos did.
Yeah, you know what? No, I think just like other schools have, shut down and skipped games. If Michigan wanted to do that, looking at their roster, I don't know, say forever for any reason, but it looks like, man, that they're pretty decimated. So I'm not going to get hung up on those things.
It does appear as if they're decimated, but if you want to leave no doubt, then don't put out a report or don't tell a reporter 16 individuals we're not going to label, or we're not going to differentiate between players and staff members have tested positive, or 45 players that include injuries, that include contact tracing, that include positive tests, they're not playing. And on top of that, Dennis, we both know that according to reports out there, Jim Harbaugh is engaged in contract negotiations right now with Ward Manuel and University. And when asked about whether or not that information is true, Ward Manuel at the press conference today said that he didn't want to address that. He'd wait till after the season is over, which is kind of funny because the season pretty much is over if you're canceling the game against Ohio State. I guess there is the week against whoever they play on the 19th, whether it's Ohio State or a Western Division team. But what do you think about The response by Ward Manuel and J.I. Block M. Harbaugh to not address it today, not to say really anything about it, and what message do you think it would send if these reports are true that Michigan truly is closing in on an extension with Jim, I never beat Ohio State Harbaugh?
Well, if they're closing in on an extension, well, get it signed then. The longer you let it go, the worse it's going to be for the Michigan program. You know, the early signing period is coming up on the 16th.
Wednesday.
And that 19th, I'm sorry?
Next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday. And the 19th, that's championship weekend. That's when they said that they would decide to look into the contract extension. So what you're doing, if you find that recruiting is important and that teams will use you not having a deal in place to possibly flip some of your recruits, is that a possibility? Absolutely. Is there a chance that you could flip recruits if you had that contract where you knew Jim Harbaugh was at least going to be around for a year or two, where you could use that in leverage to possibly get some recruits? It happens every signing day. It happens all the time. Well, now you've taken that out of the equation. That seems that the timetable for this is horrible. What it looks like to me is that Jim Harbaugh, he doesn't have any offers from any of these NFL teams, but he wants them. What to me today, saying that we're going to wait till after the season, which is the 19th, that has, people are like, Jim Harbaugh doesn't have an agent. Jim Harbaugh took his hat and threw it right into the NFL ring and said, come on and get me. Now, if I was Ward Manuel, I'd have said, look, you want to scratch that itch or see what you can get, do it over the next 5 days. But let's have something in place before signing day. And Jim must have said, you know what, let's do it after the season. He doesn't care if he's going to undercut himself potentially. To me, it seems like taking the Michigan job is going to be a fallback for Jim Harbaugh if he doesn't get an NFL job between now and the 20th. Because if he was really intent, you could just say, oh, well, it was a leverage game or whatever else. Leveraging yourself and then going past the signing date really is chopping out your legs. Terrible timetable. Terrible idea that Ward would allow this. Terrible for Jim Harbaugh. It really looks like he's begging for an NFL job. So we'll see if he's going to be able to get one. That's what it said to me, loud and clear.
Well, that's
an
interesting.
Michigan. He's holding Michigan hostage, is what it looks like to me.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. Not one that I'd even considered. That the reason that he wouldn't have a deal is because he didn't want to sign a deal because he was leveraging for an NFL job. And
well, they said the reports are that it's some sweetheart Michigan deal.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you okay? You're going to take $5-6 million, and yeah, we'll throw some things in here. And Jim's like, yeah. Was there any coincidence over the last couple of days that all of a sudden all these Jim Harbaugh and NFL? I think that when you're starting to talk about, well, what kind of deal am I going to get? Ooh, a real sweetheart deal for Michigan. Let's get some of those NFL rumors out. No, that didn't jack up the price. Well, let's wait another 10 or 12 days even before we start talking about it to see if he can get any suitors here, at least to try to drive up his price. But in the meantime, blowing past the National Signing Day is really bad. Bad idea for Michigan. If they don't lose out any recruits one way or the other, it'll be a shock.
And speaking of the details of this potential deal, according to the Detroit Free Press, the extension would offer Harbaugh a lower base salary than he currently has and a lower buyout figure, making it easier to fire him next year if needed, according to a source with direct knowledge of the conversations who confirmed an earlier report of the same details. So when you talk about a sweetheart deal or a deal that makes more sense for Michigan than it does for J.I. Block M. Harbaugh, and a deal that makes it easier to fire him would suggest that is true. When you talk about recruiting, yeah, this definitely hurts. If you have committed to the University of Michigan and in 8 days you plan to sign those papers to make it official, look, if you're Michigan all the way, it doesn't matter who the head coach is, it's your dream school, maybe you grew up in the state of Michigan, then whoever is the head coach is not going to matter to you because you want to go to Michigan. But for some of these 4 stars and 5 stars that are not from the state of Michigan, that have offers coming from Ohio State, from Alabama, from Texas A&M, from other schools in the Big Ten, Wisconsin, Penn State, Rutgers, now that Greg Schiano has been moving that program up, they might say, hey, you know what? I'm either A, going to wait until the second signing day, which doesn't come until February, to sign with the University of Michigan, and maybe even not sign with Michigan at all if Harbaugh decides to go pro, or if he signs a 1-year extension, in which case he could be gone after 1 year, and they'll have a coaching search going into my second year, or I might just flip and go somewhere else. So certainly the uncertainty of Harbaugh's contract extension is an issue right now, and recruits should be paying attention to this if they're less than 90% certain they want to go to Michigan, or if they're certain that they want to be coached by either Harbaugh or one of his staff members, because perhaps part of the reason they haven't signed the deal is because Harbaugh wants to wait until after the season to fire his defensive coordinator or something like that. The other issue is, getting out of recruiting. If you are a Michigan fan, I think that you're either going to be livid or apathetic about Harbaugh getting an extension. Because I know a lot of Michigan fans already who are apathetic, some that aren't watching games, some that are watching games, but either doing it in the background or just not caring what's going on right now. I mean, when there are dozens of reasons why Harbaugh warrants being fired or not given an extension, and nothing football related that suggests that he deserves an extension, I don't think it makes sense for him to be given an extension of even 1 year. So they're going to have to deal with a fan base that is either going to be that's going to be partially either livid or apathetic, in addition to the fans that say, hey, we're glad to have our boy back.
Yeah, maybe they won't fill up the stadium next year. Maybe with some losses they'll start booing and everything else, but I don't know what kind of read. I say this a lot about the Lions, like, oh, the fans, they're done with this, and yet, you know what? I really do think that there's, millions of fans around here that just love Matt Stafford, and they fill up Ford Field, and we always talk about how everybody's fed up, and we're ready to move on from the quarterback, and yet I don't think that's a great read. I think that there's a lot more Lion fans that are like, hey, we're really loyal with this organization. If we haven't abandoned them yet, why would we do it now? Lions versus everybody. And I think it comes down with Michigan fans. There's a lot of the same type of people. Like, I think when you take a typical Michigan fan, not only are they very loyal, but they're also sentimental. It's like, hey, Jim was a star here. He played for Bo. Like, this is the old days. This is like a tie to Schembechler, and we just love Harbaugh. They just can't quit him. They just can't think about, life without another coach. And, there was some promise, and Michigan fans love hype, and they like recruiting. Nobody brought more hype. Now, it's definitely dwindled, that hype. I'll give you that. But there's always that, like, oh, Jim will be Jim, and we got a 5-star recruit that's sitting here in the wings, and
But that chunk is going to be there, as is the growing apathetic chunk and the growing angry chunk if they see that Harbaugh signs a contract extension, because then they're going to be saying to themselves, now we're rewarding our head coach with more years and more money for never beating Ohio State, never winning the conference championship, and having his worst season at Michigan.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that looks bad. I agree with that. I think that you can try to slap the pandemic pass on everything and just say, hey, let's just eliminate this year. I think, the two things. One, if he can turn it around, a lot of people to look at, hey, Brian Kelly, and I know he went to the championship game. This is actually not my argument. I don't even like this argument. I'm just saying there's a lot of Michigan fans that are pointing to Brian Kelly, who had some 4-win season, and he canned his coordinators, and look at him, he's back in the CFP, or he's going to the CFP, and Michigan fans pinning their hopes on that. But the truth would be, nobody really knows how fans, if they're even going to be available. We're talking about in 2021 when there's a college football season, what it's going to look like. Are you going to be able to pack 110,000 in there? So a lot of it, a little bit of it, has to do with their feel about how many people are going to buy those tickets and fill up the stadium.
All right, what kind of feedback are we getting on these two big Michigan issues?
Probably a bunch of people that are agreeing with me. Let's look. It is the first one coming in from Trepo says, wouldn't it be interesting if the Big Ten matched up Michigan and Ohio State in the crossover game? So
Yeah,
that would be not this week, but the
the
following.
19th.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, you know what? That takes us into the second chapter, which we're going to talk about Ohio State. But you know what? I don't see that. It would be interesting. I mean, I would like to see it myself. You know, Michigan play Ohio State, but I think the Big Ten's got bigger fish to fry. They want to do everything they can to get Ohio State into the college football playoff, and that would not be high on the list of doing everything they could to get Ohio State into that game.
yeah, having them get a marquee win against a 2-win Michigan team.
Right. I mean, that's not really, and without having, and then you're not playing in a Big Ten championship game, which.
And Michigan's going to be depleted with players who won't meet that 21-day window of being healthy if they tested positive. While the Buckeyes that tested positive will all be back.
Right. If Michigan was really good and they were just missing out, but none of that is true. It would be good ratings, but that's, the Big Ten is trying to assure themselves that they can get a team, Ohio State, into that championship game, and this just doesn't do it for them. All right, let's see here on Facebook. Paul wanting to talk some college hockey, like always. It's good to see that. Paul, I know I came out with some college hockey the other day, and that's it.
All right,
comes down to the comments.
All right, let's turn the page to the second chapter.
All right, well, that gets us to the Buckeyes, the Herbies. There is no game coming up for them this Saturday with the Michigan game being canceled. So what happens next for the Buckeyes? A lot of different ideas here on what's going to happen. Let's go through some of them. Chap.
Well, I mean, the two big scenarios that could be put forward are number one, do you want Ohio State to play Northwestern for the Big Ten championship game on the 19th? Or number two, do you want them to play Michigan the following week, just like that person mentioned on the comments? And obviously, you look at what Ohio State did to Michigan State a few days ago, and I think it was a diet version of what they did to Wisconsin in the Big Ten title game a few years ago when they lost their top two quarterbacks and they had to go to Cardale. I didn't come here to play school Jones, and they beat the Badgers 59-0, and that told the CFP committee, you know what? They won 59-0. We kind of have to stick them in there. And against Michigan State, they were down their head coach, down 23 players, and they won 52-12 against the Spartans, who a week before had beaten the Big Ten West champion Northwestern Wildcats. So I think they tried to make their case with their best performance of the season, despite missing like a quarter of their team and their head coach. And so now they're going to get another bye week before they get to play Michigan or Northwestern. I think that Ohio State should play Michigan instead of Northwestern. And, as far as the CFP, I don't know if they should get in. But I think that Ohio State would like to win the Big Ten, but they feel like it's their right and their need and their desire to play Michigan. They win both every year for the most part. But I think they really care more about scoring 60 on Michigan. When you think about what Ohio State fans brag about, they don't brag about beating Northwestern in the Big Ten championship game. They didn't brag about doing that a couple years ago. They don't brag about beating Wisconsin, even though a couple years ago when Russell Wilson was a quarterback, I think it was Russell Wilson was a quarterback, they lost to they beat Ohio State. They brag about beating Michigan. That's the big deal to them. And I think that they would take particular interest in smashing the crap out of Michigan this year if they know that the coronavirus numbers, phony or not, kept them from getting to both of those goals of beating Michigan and winning the Big Ten championship. It wouldn't be necessarily as sexy as beating Northwestern, but if you're part of the committee, while Northwestern is certainly a better team than Michigan, they don't recruit well. They're a bunch of phony nerds, and if you beat Northwestern by 40 or you beat Michigan by 40, I don't think it's going to matter that much. So if I'm Ohio State, I'd rather beat Michigan.
Well, I think that you're missing the point on this. The thing that Ohio State wants is to get into the college football playoff, and the best way to be able to do that would be able to get a game this Saturday against anybody. If they can do that,
True.
Then the Big Ten would like to hook them up and get them the 6 games so then they could be eligible to play in the Big Ten championship game in Indy. Winning the Big Ten championship game, whoever it is against, that is something that if you're getting to the college football playoff, it almost guarantees you being, especially if Alabama beats Florida, that guarantees you getting one of those spots. And that's pretty easy. Now, what might not be easy is being able to get you a game Saturday. And if you can't do that, the Big Ten ADs are meeting tomorrow, then they'll just go like this. You only need 5 games to get into the Big Ten championship game, and they'll put the Ohio State in there. And if Ohio State wins that game, and provided that Alabama beats Florida, then Ohio State's going to be, again, into the college football playoff. The Big Ten has a lot of reasons to, cater to OSU. And when you have a pandemic and you can move things around, you do it. You want to get them in there, you get $10 million to have a Big Ten team in there. So you bend over backwards and you try to get Ohio State in there. That's $10 million that you get to split with all the schools.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing for the Big Ten, if you get shut out and there's 2 ACC and 2 SEC schools in there, that gets used against you on the recruiting trail. I couldn't even get into the college football playoff. The Big Ten wants Ohio State in there. So while Ohio State loves, kicking the teeth into the Wolverines and like you're talking about, being able to brag on that. What they want is to get into the college football playoff. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, you're right.
So the Big Ten is either going to, find them an opponent for Saturday, maybe, or then they'll snap their fingers and then put them in the conference championship game. Because I know that Penn State was at 2016. They beat Ohio State, and then Penn State, didn't get into the CFP, even though they won the Big Ten.
And that was the right move.
It was the right move, but that college football playoff committee always talks about like how much value they put into the conference championship. So I would at least, like, if given a choice, I would rather have a Big Ten championship to show rather than saying, oh, well, let's just take the ratings or let's just play anybody because we'll get in there anyways. That's not a sure thing. The surest thing that can happen for OSU is being able to play 6 and then 7 games with a Big Ten title and then having Alabama beat Florida. That's their easiest path to end up getting in.
It would, but when you talk about the Big Ten just getting together and just snapping their fingers and sticking Ohio State in there and doing it for a cash grab, doing it for money, I mean, that's what people hate about college sports. That's what they hate about these backroom deals. Hey, let's just only worry about money. Think about how unfair that would be to the Indiana Hoosiers. They were told, just like the other 13 teams, that if you play at least 6 games, that if you have the best record in your division, then you're going to go to the Big Ten championship game. It's not their fault that Ohio State has had 3 games canceled and they're not going to meet it. But Indiana has gotten to 6. They might not get to 7 because I think I heard Purdue had to pause activities today. But and I know that they lost to Ohio State, but they obeyed the rules. They didn't have an outbreak on their team. They're second in the standings. Their fan base has waited for years, which obviously has nothing to do with this. But it would be criminal if the Big Ten says, hey, you know what? Let's just all get on a Zoom call and figure out how we can screw over the Hoosiers and bend over backwards for the Buckeyes, who've already had all these Big Ten championships, who've already gone to the CFP all these times. Let's bend over backwards to screw Indiana the chance to win the conference championship. I would feel terrible for Indiana if they did something like that. Now, when it comes to the CFP and Ohio State getting in, I think that certainly if Florida loses to Alabama, it makes it clear that Florida is not going to move ahead of Ohio State because Florida would have 2 losses at that point. But when you look at Texas A&M, I think that Texas A&M should be ahead of Ohio State because they played more games. They played 8 games. They're going to play a 9th game on the 19th, and 9 games is a real schedule. Their only loss was to Alabama. They beat Florida head-to-head. They beat Auburn, I think, in their last game. And so when you talk about having to play a grind just about every single week, and you compare that to Ohio State where they play 3 bottom feeders and then a bye week. Then they have a 7-point win over the toughest team on their schedule, Indiana, and then another COVID bye week. Then they blow out Michigan State, and they got another COVID bye week to either prepare for another attempt at playing Michigan or Northwestern. Having 3 bye weeks in a 6-game season, that's not the grind of college football. Look, it's not their fault, but considering they haven't been all that dominant this year and they haven't played very many games, I'd stick a one-loss Texas A&M team in over Ohio State.
Yeah, I think besides people outside of College Station, you might be the only one. I mean, you watch Texas A&M. I watched them play Auburn. I watched them get the crap kicked out of themselves. They didn't look very impressive in that game. They don't look like a very impressive team there. It's a good point that they've had to play all those games, but in the one where they did lose, I mean, they really got punched in the mouth. And yeah, Texas A&M when they played Alabama, they got the crap kicked out of them.
They did. But they beat Florida, they beat Auburn, and
they're
not getting buys like once every 2 or 3 weeks to prepare.
Yeah, look, you know what? I think when you're talking about Indiana, if that was a really close game against Ohio State, you'd have more of a point there. But you know what? The Big Ten, like you can say, money grab. You're talking about $10 million. For the conference if they snap their fingers in a pandemic when they can. I think they would do that for any school that would be sitting there and you thought would have the best chance to get in.
Indiana would be getting royally screwed because they could care less about getting their cut of less than $1 million or of $10 million. That's less than $1 million for them. It'd be a heck of a lot more money for their program if they could call themselves maybe not the Big Ten East champions, but the Big Ten champions by beating Northwestern. They get a backup quarterback in there to go beat the Northwestern Nerds or just to compete in the Big Ten championship game. That would do a heck of a lot for that program. That'd be more than $1 million or $800,000 worth of improvements in that football program. Indiana's getting screwed because the Big Ten might want to, at the last second, just change the rules around so that Ohio State can get into the Big Ten championship in the CFP. It's wrong.
Well, I'm just telling you, if I understand it, and if I was to vote, I would snap my fingers and I would put Ohio State.
But you're pro Buckeye.
Yeah, I'm not. I just, this is how it works, and I think everybody else would do that too. It's a compelling argument for Indiana, and one that I didn't even think about having them in the Big Ten title game and you screwing them over when they had nothing to do with that. It's a very good point. I just
thank you.
But you're just going to miss out on $10 million and the conference overall losing out and getting negatively recruited about not being in the college football playoff.
Ohio State could go anyway. They could play Michigan the final week, and they could go to the CFP anyway.
Maybe, but you know what? You are like you don't want to bend over backwards for them. I get it, and you've made good points. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that you're completely out of bounds. Let's go to Trepa again. It says, Fith, you sound like you actually care about Ohio State's 2020 season. I don't really care. What I am looking at is just the realities of trying to get a team from the conference into the college football playoff. I mean, that's just simply what I'm doing. Trepa says, in reality, I hear the relief in your voice that you won't have to watch Michigan get a critical beatdown. Yeah, look, you know what? If I could snap my fingers and say, hey, Michigan, regardless of what they have out there on the field, would go down and play Ohio State, would I want to see that? When would I do I want to see it? Do I want to? I don't. I'm not under any false
That would be a hideous
that
game.
They would go. Sorry?
That would be a hideous game because you just had the JV squad for the Deep South Buckeyes beat Michigan State by 40, and Michigan State didn't have a COVID-19 outbreak. They were 100% healthy outside of injured players. Michigan would not be able to have their players back because of the 21-day window. Meanwhile, Ohio State would get their players back from the 21-day window. So you'd have a fully loaded Buckeye team, hypothetically on the 19th, against a COVID-riddled, COVID-depleted Michigan team. And you want to talk about a possibility of 100 points being put up? Maybe in that scenario.
Well, the thing is like, maybe they would lose 70-0, maybe, 70-6, 80-15, whatever, you think it might be.
And then the next day, Harbaugh contract
but
extension.
You know what? I've watched, they've only won 2 games in the last 19 years. So I take that medicine every year. I sit there and just watch, them get embarrassed and smacked upside the head. And A couple of the games have been close, but all of them, it's been the same thing. It's been Ohio State at the end. So I was ready to to take that medicine. No, I wasn't thinking that there was going to be any miracle. I fully expected to sit down and the game to be over in the first 5 minutes. Like, whoa, this is what I was saying when I said that they hoped that they would play. But you'll just have to take my word for it. I wanted to see them play. I would have watched that. I would have hated it, and I think that they would have lost 70-12.
Yeah, and it wouldn't look good. We have some more feedback, and we turn the page to the third chapter.
We are looking at Facebook first just to see what is good on this particular iPad. It doesn't. We're going to the next chapter.
All right, as we turn the page to the third chapter, that takes us to the same old Lions. And they've got no GM. They've got an interim head coach in Darrell Bevell, and that group has led the Lions to a 1-0 start because they got lucky. They came back from a 10-point fourth quarter deficit to beat the Bears 34-30. Akuari got that strip of Mitch Trubisky inside the red zone that they were able to easily punch in for the touchdown late. And look, it was disappointing if you won a high draft pick as a Lions fan, and it's great if you're a slappy. But it also gets people conflicted again, and that's because Arizona lost and Minnesota won, and that means even though the Lions are the 10 seed in the NFC, they're just one game back of the 7 seed because the Vikings are 6-6. The 8 seed Arizona Cardinals are 6-6. The Bears and Lions are both 5-7. One game back with 4 games to go. We'll get to the coach and GM search in a minute. But Dennis, given the current playoff picture, do we have to start talking about the Lions in the playoffs again?
Well, you could talk about the Lions in the playoffs, and I've seen screen grabs where the Lions are in the hunt.
Yeah.
And I haven't thought that they were in the hunt. They had an opportunity this season when they went down and they beat Jacksonville, but when they beat Atlanta, like that was nothing to like jump up and down about. But they put themselves in position where if they were ready to show people if they were contenders or not. And then they played the Colts, and then they played the Vikings, and they were pretenders. And they played embarrassing football. And so it's all over. It's all over here. And no, I don't think they're going to the playoffs. I guarantee they don't go to the playoffs. And here we are.
Yeah, they're not a contender. It was one of those typical same old Lions wins. We're familiar with same old Lions losses, but it was a same old Lions win when you want them to lose, but they win the game anyway. And then you look at the standings and you wonder, well, if you're a fan of this team, am I a bad fan if I don't want them to win because they're just so close, they're just one game out? But obviously, 75% of the way through the season, if you still have a losing record, if you squeaked by a bad team while giving up 30 points to a terrible offense, I mean, it should be clear that you're no good. I think the only way that you could convince me that the Lions are a playoff contender would be, hey, next week you go to Green Bay or you host Green Bay and you beat them to get to 6-7, because then all of a sudden you could make the case that, hey, Matt Patricia was a terrible coach, which you don't even have to really make that case, but Matt Patricia was the real issue. The roster maybe isn't as bad as we thought it was, but now that they have cleaned out Matt Patricia, who is destroying everything, they've gotten back-to-back wins, including against a Super Bowl contender in the Packers, and who knows, at that point, the Lions might even have tied the record for the 7 seed in after beating Green Bay, and they have a shot to make the playoffs. But I don't expect them to beat the Packers. I think whatever the line is, the Packers are gonna cover it. They're gonna blow out the Lions, and that's that.
Yeah, well, that's what I would think too. Like, you're right. It gets to this time of year, and you have to ask yourself, like, the Lions. What I think they had a 1% chance. That some of the numbers that were put out there during that Bears game, of actually making the playoffs. So, that's going to be usually. You'd say I get like fans and saying until we're absolutely eliminated, I'm going to root for them. So technically they weren't. That's what my friend was telling me last week. They're not. So when you say we got a chance, people love saying that. That's what he was telling me. So, he was like, well, I'm not rooting against them until, they're eliminated. So they're not eliminated, but for all intents and purposes, they are. And, there they were doing what they usually do. When you want them to win, they lose, and then vice versa. And here we are again towards the end of the season. And what really gets you is when they're eliminated, and then you could start seeing like, wow, man, they could get a top 5 draft pick. And then they go out and grab some dubs, slide back. And yeah, that's it. I don't think they'll beat the Pack, but you know what? Like,
they're done winning football games this year.
In the strange Lions world, that is something. Get a little bevel bump, like my friend was telling me, and here we go. Look at this. Putting themselves in the back of the mix. But no, I think they'll get blown out on Sunday.
Yeah, I think they're done winning football games. My prediction before the season was 5-11, and I'm sticking to it. As for that coach and GM search, check out this tweet from Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network. And it says, speaking of coaching searches, one note, while the Texans will use a search firm for their coaching/GM search, the Falcons and the Lions won't use a search firm to lead their respective searches. So what does that mean if they're not going to use a search firm? Well, that means exactly what Sheila Ford Hamp said, a week and a half ago after she fired Quinn and Patricia, and that is that she and Rod Wood, who said that he is not a football guy when he was hired by the Lions 5 years ago, they're going to be asking the hard questions. They're going to be assembling the list of interviewees and asking the hard questions about why this general manager is the best candidate to lead the same old Lions out of the bottom of the barrel to becoming Super Bowl contenders. He also... Rod Wood was asked by the Detroit Free Press about his current role with the team, and also Bevel, the new head coach, the interim head coach, was asked about what Rod Wood does, and Wood said that the two of them said that Wood is part of a 6-man group that makes decisions, gives input on roster decisions, weighs in on salary cap implications, and makes game day inactive decisions. And according to the Free Press, several potential GM candidates are known to have concerns about the structure of the Lions front office and reporting to a non-football executive other than owner Sheila Ford Hamp. I mean, this to me just has SOL written all over it, same old Lions written all over it. I'm not a football guy, but I know how to pick some football guys. This sounds like a joke, and this is why there's no reason to be optimistic about them.
Well, when they cut the wide receiver this last week, and then Darrell Bevel was like, yeah, Rod Wood was out on the decision. That was like, whoa, everybody was like, what are you talking about? Rod Wood was in on that decision? Why would Rod Wood be in on a decision on the 53-man roster? You just can't make that kind of stuff up. Except when you go back and one of the issues with the Lions organization, a lot of people don't want to admit it, but they just need to look up the word cronyism. And if you look it up here in Detroit, you see a picture of Rod Wood. I mean, there he is. He was a banker, the family accountant, and they were just handed him, the president's job for the Lions. And then, if he was just going to be a behind-the-scenes guy and working on the numbers and somebody that doesn't know anything about football, that's one thing, although it was a bad look. Right off the bat, the Martha put him up there in front of everybody, and he was the voice of the organization before they had anything. It was a cluster blank right out of the gate, and it's been that way. Find a different role for him. Just, you already said, like, some of the GMs are looking at that and saying, we don't want to go there. I think it's a smart move, actually, not to throw yourself on the mercy of the league and have one of these search teams. The last time, of course, he was just hooking up people that he liked. It's just like anybody, like Tony Dungy, it sounds like he wants to bring back Jim Caldwell. What? If you bring in Tony Dungy, he's going to go with one of his guys. If you bring in Ernie Accorsi, he's going to go with one of his guys. So, you just have to, you and I could take 5 minutes and look at a story from Dave Burkett and assemble a list of about 20 GMs. If we took another hour, we could probably come up with another 5. I don't know how many interviews they want to do, but I would talk with Barry, and I would talk with Spielman, and I would talk with Herman Moore. They don't have to make the choice, but I would say, hey, guys, would you, whatever you have to offer them, sit in and give us your input, on what you think of these interviews here. And then at the end, Sheila, has to make she has to make the call, and it's really going to come down to who you really, connect with in those interviews. But I don't like the idea that Rod Wood, and then they're really, Sheila pointing out, well, Rod's learned so much, being on the job for the years that he has. I mean, I want a lifer. I want
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that that
I
instead
like
of
the plan that you brought up last week that you just mentioned moments ago about getting some guys that know about football and want the best interest of the Lions more so than just buddies that they have to get this job. Spielman, Herman Moore, Barry Sanders, maybe Robert Porcher, maybe Lomas Brown. Some guys like that certainly know a heck of a lot about football. They're not accountants and have connections around the league. Certainly Spielman does because he does these games on national television. Herman Moore, I'm sure that he has connections as well, and have them reach out and have them conduct the interviews. Because think about it, when it comes to figuring out who's best to lead the organization, you're going to have decision makers or whomever interviewing the candidates. Think about the kinds of questions that Sheila Ford Hamp and Rod Wood are going to ask. So we see that you did a good job with the Green Bay Packers. Do you think you can do that in Detroit? I mean, I just don't have any confidence that she or Rod Wood are going to ask the necessary nuts and bolts, X's and O's questions that are going to be required to get a good GM. Whereas folks that have been playing football for 15 years and then study football all the time and were studying football before they got to the NFL and afterwards and are still in the game, they're going to have questions that Sheila and Rod Wood wouldn't even consider. They need to be the ones making the decisions, not Sheila Ford Hamp and Rod Wood saying, hey, well, they promised that they would draft this guy and they promised that they'd lead us to a championship in 5 years. They don't know the questions to ask. They need, whether it's a search firm given to them by the NFL or individuals that they trust that have football knowledge, they need real football folks making this football decision.
Well, it's even worse than what you're saying right there because Rod Wood, I mean, the whole cronyism thing, given a job that the only reason that you have it is because you're in good with the person that's making the decision, even though you're not qualified for it. That's Rod Wood.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have seen over the years with the Fords, William Clay Ford kept Matt Millen around because he liked eating dinner with him, and Matt Millen, is a nice dinner companion, and would tell Ford how great he was. There's been a constant there in people that are in position of power with the Lions. They all, and everybody likes to talk good about their boss, but the part about the brown nosing and bootlicking with the Lions, it's in their entire organization. You see it if you're down there in the press box over the years. It's really something. They need to eliminate that part. That's the thing with Rod Wood. Rod Wood's in there, and that was the whole thing with Bob Quinn. Quinn came in, drove a Ford, told everybody how much he loved Matt Stafford, and you're sitting around like, whoa, man, he got the memo. Just kiss this organization's ass, and whoever does it the most, you're going to get the job. I would guarantee out of all of that list, if we could just listen to all the interviews, the interviewee who kisses Sheila's ass the most is the one that's going to get the job. And that's not what you want. Mm-hmm. That's what's been happening with this organization all along. And Rod Wood, because he's in the position that he is, because he was a big ass kisser, you think he's going to be able to sift through all that? Hell no.
Well,
that's the problem. That's why they need. I'm glad that those couple GMs were like, yeah, the Rod Wood connection here. Let's get rid of that. Yeah, if Wood is going to be in on those, that's going to be something here. And you see a lot of people like, well, Wood's been pretty good at his job. No, get him out of that. If Wood is involved in evaluating and picking the next general manager or head coach, that it is very SOL. And I would expect in another 4 or 5 years that them be back in the same situation.
Yeah, if you're not well versed in football and you bring in 5 candidates and they're all assistant GMs or TV personalities or directors of pro personnel, they're all going to seem extremely impressive to you as a non-football individual. They could just throw out concepts that are, pretty much basics to folks in the industry that you won't ever heard of, and you'll just think, wow, this guy seems like he knows what he's talking about. Let's hire this person. Or they'll just say, they all are impressive. This one kissed my ass the most, like you were talking about. Therefore, I think we've got our guy because he came in, he had a demeanor about him. He seemed strong. He had a nice list of coaches. So, yeah,
one of those things that hammered it home? Remember when they had Sheldon White? He was like an interim GM for a while. I think after they fired Martin Mayhew, so he was in there, I think for half the season.
Yeah.
And about 3 games in, somebody was like, Sheldon White was really complimentary of Martha Ford's pick of the design of the chairs at Allen Park. And it was like, what the hell? It's like somebody gave Sheldon the game plan. Go in there and just fawn over Martha, and you got a good shot at get. I'm surprised that he wasn't given the job.
Yeah. What kind of feedback were you getting about these same old Lions?
Well, let's have a look here. I've nobody commenting on the Lions here. Our normals are out, unless I'm just not getting the feedback as per usual here. So I don't know what's going on. That's it. No feedback.
All right, then let's turn the page to the 4th chapter.
Actually, you shouldn't say that there's no feedback. I actually think there is. I'm just not hitting the right button. Oh, here we go. There.
I'm sure there's got to be some.
Treps is on there. Guess I'm just not.
I see one from Joey. This is from an earlier chapter that says, "I'm on the Penn State Big Ten title game plan 2 # Team Chap," because I did lay out that scenario.
I did skip that one off. I didn't do that on purpose, but yeah, there we go. All right, yeah, let's go to the 5th chapter.
4th.
Oh, 4th chapter. Well, that's me. And that's talking about the Pistons in the NBA. And I was just looking at the timeline here that I have put down. Where is it at? Oh, yeah, here it is. Preseason Friday. Regular season is coming your way in 2 weeks. And the big news out of Pistons camp is that Killian Hayes, who was the first-round pick, number 7 overall for the Pistons, already a starter for this team, starting for the Pistons. Let's start there with Hayes. Surprised that they're already handing him the starting point guard job?
Yeah, I am surprised that they're giving it to him so quickly. I get that they're impressed with, and I mean every report that I've seen from Rod Beard or some of the others that are covering the team is from a player saying that he understands the game very well. He's got a certain level of maturity to him. Obviously, he's been playing in the French league with adults for the last 3 years, so I'm sure that he's played against some former college stars and things like that. So they feel that he's got a strong knowledge for the game, and that makes sense from their standpoint to go with Hayes as the starter over Derrick Rose, and obviously they still want to limit Derrick Rose's minutes. But I was surprised by this, not having seen him play against the competition of Pistons teammates. I think that they're probably jumping the gun a little bit. They're going to have 4 preseason games beginning, like you said, this Friday, so they can test out how he fares against other NBA players. But I'll say this. If they're not just throwing him to the wolves and saying, hey, he's going to struggle for like the first 30 games, but it's going to work out eventually, and he actually is ready to start, then think about how we considered this draft to be, where there were 3 top guys in Ball, Wiseman, and Edwards, who were they went 1, 2, and 3, not respectively, but they weren't clearly better than the guys who were projected to go 5th or 7th or 9th or whatever. I mean, Denny Avdia, who was selected after Hayes, I think he was selected like 9th or 10th. Some folks think that he might be the best player in the draft, and if Hayes truly is worthy of starting over Derrick Rose, or it's even close, then the Pistons might have a Rookie of the Year candidate. They might have an All NBA or an All Rookie First Team candidate, which is a big win for this organization that's trying to rebuild.
It sure would be, and you take into account that the point guard is the toughest transition to come out and hit the ground running. So having him come out and being pushed out on the floor, and what you're talking about, usually you would say you got to wait 3 years on a point guard to take a look to really see if he's going to be able to run a team. If this guy can do it in 30 games, sign me up for that. But you're right, and you like to see that good news, and we'll find out here pretty shortly what this guy's got. But will he be able to run a team that is expected to be closer to the bottom than the top? How would he handle all of those things? It'd be a surprise if he's out there and gets the ball right out of the gate and he's running the show for the Pistons.
Well, and on top of that, no summer league. You're talking about being drafted less than a month ago, and I think they didn't get to start going 5-on-5 until yesterday or today because of coronavirus protocols. There's not much continuity because I think there's only 3 or 4 players that are left over from last year. So he's got to deal with all of that, no continuity, not knowing the playbook, adjusting to a different country and everything like that. And all of a sudden he's running a team. That's a lot to deal with if you're any rookie, much less someone who's starting and coming from a different country. One of the other pieces of news from Pistons training camp. And some might laugh and say, oh, this is not just a big deal, it's just coach speak. And it probably is. But check out this tweet from Rod Beard of the Detroit News. Dwayne Casey says he didn't know a lot about some of the 16 to 20 roster guys on LiAngelo Ball. Quote, excellent player, great kid. And he said some other things as well. But hey, if LiAngelo Ball is really a, quote, excellent player, and that wasn't coach speak, and they've got this huge weakness at shooting guard, perhaps there is the ability for him to get some significant playing time, work his way into the starting lineup, and do exactly what LeVar Ball said last week, and that's get 25 to 30 a game. But in all seriousness, maybe he could be in this rotation.
Yeah, maybe like this is the thing. You take a bunch of shots with a team that you're just throwing together here. You don't know any of the names besides Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose and Doumbouya. And is there one other that was a holdover, or is that
Svi.
it? Oh yeah, Svi. That's it, Svi. And let's see, which one of these guys, if 1 or 2 or 3 of these guys can stick and be part of a playoff team in 3-4 years. I mean, that's what it's about here. So. Yeah, let's see. That's why taking that shot on Ball was really, a very low risk, high reward.
Now, the other story we wanted to get to is Kyrie Irving because he's at it again. He gives me headaches because obviously he's such a talented player. He's won a championship. He did so with LeBron James. He's got one of the best handles of anybody in the NBA, but he's just so selfish and cocky and confusing for no reason. And the latest on him, there's 2 latest things on him. One is the back and forth with LeBron James, because here is what he said during the NBA Finals on Kevin Durant's podcast, and that got a lot of attention. And then after that, we'll play for you what LeBron James said in response. And he just responded, I believe, either earlier today or yesterday. But here is what Kyrie Irving said back then.
10 seconds left. 1-point game. Who's shooting? You or Kyrie, KD?
Depends on who's hot. I don't see it as anything other than that. Like 1-3 pick and roll, or it's an ISO for either one of us, or it's something great for our team. One thing I've always been comfortable with is, I felt like I was the best option on every team I played for, down the stretch. This is the first time in my career where I could look down and be like, that motherfucker can make that shot too.
Now, obviously, he said that on Kevin Durant's podcast, but let's not forget, he played with LeBron James, and this is the first time that somebody on his team could take the last shot along with him. But then here was the LeBron James response.
So when I heard the comment that Kyrie made, I wanted to, not only find the whole transcript, but also call my people, send me the whole transcript. And I heard he did it on Katie's podcast, and I was a little like damn.
Yeah.
Once I got the whole transcript, I was like damn. I wasn't like, oh, you tripping? I'm hit game-winning shots on my whole life. I was not like that. I was like damn, because you were there for a couple seasons. I mean, I played with Kyrie for 3 seasons. The whole time while I was there, I only wanted to see him be an MVP of our league. I only cared about his success, and it just didn't align. Yeah. It just didn't align, and we was able to win a championship. Yeah. That's the craziest thing. We were still able to win a championship, and we could never align. But I only cared about his well-being, both on and off the floor, and it kind of hurted me a little bit.
LeBron James hurt by the comments of Kyrie Irving. And if I could just throw one other thing in there, this coming from back in, actually not even going back to the thing in the summer, but recently Kyrie Irving said at Media Day that he was not going to be speaking to the media, not just on Media Day, but all year long. He was going to let his talking do the work on the court and off the court, and say nothing to the media for the entirety of the season, despite being one of the top paid players and one of the most talented players and leaders on this team. What do you think about all this Kyrie Irving nonsense?
Yeah, well, he loves to go on podcasts, so he's only hurting himself there. Although when you look at somebody like Marshawn Lynch, who only showed up the thing so he wouldn't get fined, it's worked out great for him when it comes to marketability. So I think all of that goes into it when it comes to Kyrie, and I'm sure he'll be heading out on his boys' podcast and talking there. But you know what? I'm past the point where I'm going to criticize players for having to open up their mouths after a basketball game to describe what's going on. They don't want to talk. To hell with them. Don't talk. And you hurt your own fans that might want to hear what you have to say, but I don't care. If you don't want to talk, it's all gibberish and it's all boring. So we don't want to hear from Kyrie Irving. Having said that, I'm a Kyrie Irving fan. I love his game. I thought it was going to work even there in Boston for a second, and then I don't know what happened in there. But if you can get everything right with Kyrie, I find it intriguing, him being there with Brooklyn, with Durant and that team there. I hope it ends up working out because I love watching him play. And, sometimes I listen to interviews with him. Ironically, he's very thoughtful and somebody that, you really sticks out and say, hey, this guy's a pretty interesting guy. But, you know what, he had all that where he was whispering in the tunnel and, people were able to get that.
The earth is flat.
Well, I don't even know where all that. I like the Uncle Drew stuff, so and he's got billions of followers on Instagram. So, I think the younger generation really, they like maybe because you get somebody in a 6-second highlight. There's nobody better than Kyrie Irving. So I don't know about any of that. So some of that stuff is a little bit weird, but just when it comes down to his overall game, I love it. If you can get his head on straight, if he's healthy, you just get him in that situation, I think you can win with him. But, all that other stuff, he's pretty wild.
Yeah, I want to like him because he's such a talented player. He's one of the best ball handlers in NBA history. You mentioned the Uncle Drew stuff that I like, but he just makes it so easy to hate as a player. And it first started, actually, when he demanded a trade away from the Cavaliers. They had gone to the NBA Finals 3 straight years, and he says, I want out because LeBron James is the man and because LeBron James gets to bring his posse on the plane. Meanwhile, you didn't just win the championship. You hit the game-winning shot in Game 7 to win it, and then you want out. That shows me something about his ego. Then he goes to Boston, and it seems like that's a ready-made spot to win a championship or contend for a championship because they had all that young talent around him. He gets hurt like he always does. And guess what? When he gets hurt, they fare even better in the playoffs. What does that say about Kyrie Irving? And then he goes to Brooklyn and he sits out basically the whole season. All he does is get hurt and become like a cancer to his team. And now he's saying that he's a better option than LeBron James down the stretch. And maybe Kevin Durant is a guy who might finally be on his level. In addition to that, did you hear the comments that he made when Steve Nash became the head coach of the Nets? A lot of you guys might not have. He said, quote, I think it's also going to change the way we see coaches. I don't really see us having a head coach. You know what I mean? KD could be a head coach. I could be a head coach. So he's not looking to take any orders from anybody, not even the head coach. He's looking for a partnership. And I get that things aren't like they were back in the day where a head coach could just go in there and rip everybody, and then they could go to the media and rip the players and all that other stuff, and then the players be like, oh, I guess we better shape up. But Kyrie Irving acting like he's better than the head coach, acting like he's better than LeBron James. It's this joke. And then the media blackout is juvenile. It's disrespectful. He's a team leader. He's one of the highest paid and best players in the NBA and certainly on his team. And after he goes out and scores 45 points in a big win where he turns it over 7 times, he's just going to walk out and say, go talk to Spencer Dinwiddie about my game. That's a joke. That's not being a leader. Spencer Dinwiddie and Jarrett Allen shouldn't have to answer for you. Talk to the media. It doesn't have to be every day like Blake Griffin does. He is a real team leader, but you can't say, I'm not going to speak to them at all throughout the course of the season. That's not being a leader, and that's why the Nets are never going to make the Eastern Conference Finals with Kyrie Irving. Never.
Even when James Harden joins them?
Oh no, because he's going to screw that up.
Probably.
Kyrie Irving is not going to like having James Harden on that team if that happens.
All right, well, let's get to the 5th chapter, and that's where we get into some wagering, major wagering. And I did, I don't think you'd accuse me of being like a Herb Street, but I went the Herb Street route. I went all Ohio last week, Chep. I took the Buckeyes minus 27.5. It made the Michigan State game really interesting. They had it covered right at half, but, then the Spartans got a score there, and, OSU covered that game. But then the Browns, plus 5.5. I stayed right there in Ohio on the pro game and came away with a nice 2-game sweep. So how about that?
Yeah, that was a heck of a week for you. So what do you have for tonight?
I'm looking. I know the Giants played well this past week against the Seahawks, and they're up there, in the NFC East. And they got a pretty good defense. And Daniel Jones, I think, is coming back. And the Cardinals have not played well. And maybe Kyler Murray's hurt. Because his rushing totals are down here, but this is one of those situations where the Cards have to have this game. They're minus 2.5 against the G-men. I'm going to go with Kyler Murray and company. I'm going to lay the points and take Arizona for 100.
Yeah, the Giants have been playing pretty well. I last Thursday picked St. Mary's minus 15.5 against Texas Southern, and St. Mary's won, but only by 12, so bad pick by me. Tonight, Baltimore's a 9-point favorite with all the drama around the Ravens. I'm going with the healthier team that has had more time to prepare. I'm going with the Cowboys plus the 9 points.
Good luck with that, chap. Hey, on Thursday, will we know more about Jim Harbaugh's extension? We'll have more to say about it. We'll get to that coming up on Thursday. So for Brian Chapman, I'm Dennis Vithian. Thanks for watching, listening, all those things, subscribing. We do appreciate that. We'll talk with you next time here on the 5th chapter.
He represents the mitten by way of Penn State. When Chapman gets to talking sports, the people can't wait. He represents the mitten. Be a true EMU, but cut Dennis in the fall, and his veins bleeding blue. They got respect around the state. When that light turns red, so don't sleep on these dudes. Just invite your friends to cut your nap short and tip your cap over and sit back for the 5th chapter. Brian Chapman. Dennis Vithian. When they open their mouths, they spit in the facts, bro. This ain't even optional, man. You just have to tune into YouTube to watch the broadcast or download it to your phone to peep the podcast. They mix laughter, they get after. It's all captured in the 5th chapter.